Thank you so much for joining me today. Will you please introduce yourself and the short title to your story?
Yeah, my name is Thomas Brown, and I would say that the short title to my story is Journey of Self.
Know thyself, right?
Yeah. Know thyself. It's to me, self-awareness is the only game in town.
I'm so there with you on that page. So Thomas, tell me about what life was like for you as little Thomas.
Well, little Thomas, that's funny. Um, I had a roof over my head, I had food on the table, I had clothes on my back. My parents I think like they taught me the greatest thing that all human beings need to be taught, and that's like empathy and compassion, especially more so for others than for yourself. Uh, you know, I think that was the greatest lesson I ever learned from my parents. Uh, I do kind of have an axe to grind because maybe I wanted my parents to be a little bit more wizardry in their life lessons. And unfortunately, and they weren't. So I set out to find that type of knowledge from other places. And without having a playbook, I uh, I I found more unscrupulous people than I did, genuine wizards. It was mainly like me like seeing somebody who was really good at bullshitting their awareness of the world, and I being a codependent, frightened young man would just latch on to those people, and that usually led to doing like a lot of unsafe things, a lot of experimentation with drugs and alcohol in my 20s, and even into my early 30s. I think like the biggest thing with growing up with my family, I had an older brother, and he was kind of the golden child for my family. My parents are from a small towns in Kansas, in southern Kansas, Derby and Wellington. And, it was just, I always say that they came from a simpler time. And what I mean by that is that they're just a lack of technology. And they raised two boys, one being born in 71, the other one being born in 77, being me. And that was kind of like as technology was just starting to take off.
Mhm,
And I just don't think my parents knew how to deal with that, the information, the speed of information that came
mhm,
at us, and being growing up in a bigger town in the Phoenix, in a suburb of the Phoenix area. We just had a completely different lifestyle than my parents had, and my parents didn't know how to understand that. They couldn't compute that how fast society was changing. And my brother, being a very um, bombastic, charismatic person, used that to exploit my parents. Um, he knew that he was looked upon as the golden child, and so he kind of dominated my household. And I didn't really start to notice that until I graduated from high school, and I didn't really like it. So my brother and I were at odds, um, for about 4 years, and then the last 4 months of his life, things started to shift with him and I, where he was trying to make amends with that.
mm,
But that all came about because, with his skills of manipulation, his powers of persuasion, he had two primary girlfriends for about 10 years, and then other sexual conquests on the side. And my parents knew it, and I knew it, and my dad never sat my brother down and said, "Son, like, just what you're doing isn't right. And if you're gonna do that, you can't live under my house, under my roof, and do that." So one of his two, I knew both of his girlfriends. One of them was somebody that I went to high school with, and the other one became my boss at one point in time. So I just didn't want to be a part of it. I didn't want to be in the middle of it, and I think that's one of the reasons why I found such unscrupulous people that like to experiment with drugs. That I just, I and I became a fan of cannabis, and my brother was, if you're not going to help lie for me when I need you to, then you're somebody that I can't trust. And so I will, he hated me because I smoked cannabis, but also because I wouldn't lie for him. I just didn't want to be a part of that story that he was creating. I was just like, leave me out, and he just couldn't have it. And it didn't help that him and I both worked for the same institution at the time. So even when I didn't want to be a part of his life, he would still try to manipulate things by creating rumors and stuff about me. Luckily, it never panned out and never got fired for anything. But it was a really weird way to enter my 20s and to be dealing with some of that. The two women got wise to his antics and they both left him at the same time. And my brother, he kind of crumbled. Um, he told everybody he had cancer. And I think that was his way of being like, nobody is going to accept me if I just admit that I'm sad and depressed and where my behavior has led me. But if I tell them I'm sick, that will account for like the weight loss. He already had like a shaved head. So like he already didn't have any hair anyways. So, that was he didn't have to like bring up stuff about like chemo with that. But there was no proof that he had cancer. Um, None whatsoever. And I think that he just didn't have the courage to just say like, "Hey, I'm hurting, I'm in pain." This was back in like 2000, 2001. When he passed in August of 2001, he said that he had cancer in 2000 in about April 2001, and he wasn't able to admit that he was in pain. And so created this, being a master manipulator, he took on this other story to
Yeah.
explain. And the thing about being a good storyteller is that there's a part of you that has to believe in what you're telling in order to like really sell the idea, especially if you're trying to sell something. You know, grifting 101. Um, you got to believe the bullshit you're peddling. And him and I started to make more of a come like we started to come back together as siblings. Um but it didn't get past August 20th, 2001. He took his own life and kind of created a lot of pain and frustration and uncertainty for all of his friends and family after that. And I wouldn't say that like that was the thing that messed me up. I was already pretty messed up. I was confused and uncertain, and as I said before, had my cross to bear was a profound amount of codependency. My brother's death was just the last drop in the bucket, and and I was always like somebody that like I expressed my emotions. I expressed my feelings. I had no problem crying um when hanging out with my buddies or like expressing my feelings, but I wouldn't take that next step to be like, "Oh man, I'm depressed," or maybe I should seek out professional help other than just relying on my friends to like hear all of my sadness and grief because that just becomes exhausting.
Yeah, it's real
So
hard to support your friend who's always got some drama going on. Like
yeah, yeah,
for your friendship's sake, you should probably reach out and talk to someone who is going to have a very limited perspective of you. It's helpful.
yeah, yeah. I mean, it took me several years before I finally found myself in a therapist office. So I made the boneheaded. I saw how much my parents were affected by my brother's death, and so I made like the boneheaded decision that like I'm gonna focus on them and help them. I didn't have any of the tools or or understanding to help myself, let alone help two adults that were struggling from the loss of their firstborn child. Um, so it was just, I would still express how I was feeling with my friends. I had one friend that I had grown up with for a long time, and him and I were roommates, and it was really he was really open, and we would just sit back and smoke some joints and express ourselves and talk about our feelings. Um, but because I didn't have that extra help that you can get from a therapist, I would still find myself in toxic relationships. So I was still struggling. So as much as like my brother's suicide and his death like affected me, I was already I was already kind of messed up.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, you've
um
obviously put in some work just from the verbiage you've chosen, right?
yeah,
Super
yeah.
duper codependency. Like you don't pick that up just in regular conversation. That takes
No.
work to get to that point. So you grew up with this in this situation where he was the golden child and he literally made problems for you in
Hmm.
areas because you wouldn't play along with his game. And then all of a sudden, he takes his own life and you're left with this mess, right? You're left
Hmm.
with two parents that you care about very much who are struggling and having a hard time. And you being the good son decide, well, I need to help my parents. And you start in on that, but at what point did you figure out that you were kind of inadequate for that job?
Oh, I I knew it right away. Um, but I was really good at distracting myself with stuff. Like,
Mm.
so my brother died in 2001. I didn't wander into therapy until 2008. And
Woo.
I think it's because I had some triumphs in between
Mhm.
in between then. I was, in a really I found myself in a relationship. It was pretty toxic, but because I was codependent, I stayed in it. And even like my childhood friend that I was with, I realized that that was really toxic as well. And I just knew like around 2005, I was like, man, I need a change. Like something needs to happen with my life. And my mom told me my parents went to a really progressive Christian church, like super progressive, not Unitarian, but really progressive for a Christian uh, theology. And my mom would always tell me about this minister. Like he was really into music, he was really into movies, and he would bring in, non-religious music and movies into his sermons and show like how the stories in the Bible, the themes still persist. And this was before I got into Joseph Campbell, which was kind of like that became my JC. Um and with my love for stories. So like I had always heard about this guy Eric in my periphery, and I like so in 2005 I was like in the need of like massive change. I wouldn't get out of my relationship. I wouldn't get out of any of my relationships, though I knew that they were toxic for me. And then this idea came up from my parents' minister that they were going to walk across the country from Phoenix, Arizona to Washington, D.C. And so I decided as a non-Christian I was going to walk with them. They were all about how secular art is just as important as scripture, how we should take care of the planet, how people of different sexual orientations are still our brothers and sisters, and we should support them in their journey. That there is more than one path of spirituality to take to get to the mountaintop to, interact with whatever somebody wants to call spirit or divine. And they were into social justice, and I just really resonated with that. So I was like, I want to walk cross country with these people. And there was a filmmaker that was going with them, and I had a love for storytelling and film and TV and all that. And I'd always wanted to go to film school. So this guy was like, "Hey, you're not going to get paid, but you want to be like my assistant, my production assistant. You won't be walking every day, and when you do, you'll be walking backwards with them." So I went along with them on this journey and became a production assistant for this documentary. And, I'd never gone any further east than Wichita, Kansas
Oh
growing
my.
up. Yeah. Growing up here in Phoenix, Arizona, because there was no reason to go any further. My family, we didn't go on a lot of vacation trips. If we did, we just went to California to go to the beach because it was the closest to us. So like this was the furthest I'd ever been east. As soon as we left Wichita, like every day I was getting further and further away from home. And I just fell in love with the idea of travel and people. I still haven't gone across the pond yet, but I do find myself going on weird and wacky adventures in the United States. So when I came back, I jumped back in. I started film school. I went by myself. I kind of was like leaving away from my codependency. I'd always wanted to go to film school with my buddy, my lifelong buddy, uh, and because him and he had the same love and passion for film. He just didn't want to do anything. And so I was codependent with him. I didn't want to go along. And he had moved in the time that I had left on this journey, he moved to another state. And I came back and I was like, I'm just going to do it and I'll meet people along the way. But I was still in that damaging relationship, that intimate relationship with this woman. And, you know, dealing with that and the mess of that is what finally got me into therapy in 2008. And I was still in a relationship with her, even though I knew I shouldn't be. She even lived in Flagstaff, and like I had that space to like get away from her, but I was still in it. And it wasn't until like I met Kim, my therapist, and she just kind of like peeled me open like an onion, just layer after layer after layer after layer. It was like, why do you believe the things that you believe? Why do you respond and react emotionally the way to situations the way they do? Why do you find yourself interacting with these people, with certain people, those types of people over and over again? So that was like really like my first introduction of like the power of um of self-awareness. And then with that, she introduced me to Daniel Quinn, the author of the book series Ishmael, which is really he kind of tells these fictional stories, but he has this philosophy of like the importance of knowing your story and knowing like the national story, the familial story, and like the personal story, and yeah, how to like create your own story. And in between like Kim and Daniel Quinn and starting to read like Joseph Campbell and really getting into him and all these different ancient stories resonate with each other despite space and time. Um, I just I started to like see myself more and like what was I really wanting in this world and in this life and how to like navigate it. I finally got out of that really toxic relationship. Was in another one. It wasn't as toxic. You could tell I was getting a little bit better, but I'd also met this guy through my work. I was still working at the same place. It was a after school program. Same type of it was working for the same city that my brother and I worked at when he died. And this guy came in. His name is Zach, and we kind of took a liking to each other, completely different types of people. Um, and I was more of, if you were going to look at style, I was really into grunge, and he was a big time hipster. And it wasn't until we like went out for coffee one night that, he's like, "So what's your story?" And I lay it all out, talk about my brother, talk about like my codependency, talk about the relationships I've been in. Well, first of all, when I met him at the coffee shop, he was reading the second book of the Ishmael trilogy, or the third book of the Ishmael trilogy, and I would just started the second. So we had that weird coincidence right there. But later that night, he revealed to me that he had also lost his brother to suicide. So Zach was the first person that I had ever met outside of my family or my brother's circle of friends that had lost somebody to suicide. So I was like, my community had grown by one, but it was like a really profound growth. And just having him like there was amazing. I found out a few days later that Zach also has the same birthday as my brother. So, I I just I felt there was like something between Zach and I that was important. That we weren't just meant to, drink beer, play basketball, and chase babes. I used the three B's for that. We weren't just like there was something more for our relationship. And I met him. We went out probably in February of 2010 is when we had that coffee meetup, and we hung out like all night. And in June of 2010, I was doing a photo shoot like at a for a community gathering at a bar, and he came to meet up with me, and him and I told him about my walk across the country and how I wanted to do something like that again, how that really opened me up and opened my eyes up to a greater world out there and a greater perspective. And he's like, "Well, I would love to do something like that, but I'm not going to walk. I like to ride bicycles. We should ride bicycles." And then he was all this like, we should also do it for our brothers. So in June of 2010, we had this idea to ride our bikes across the country for to honor our brothers who had both lost to suicide. And there was still like some thinking about it, the denial of phase two of Joseph Campbell's monomyth of the hero's journey, where it was about 6 months of me denying the adventure, the call to adventure. And then in February 2011, I was like, all right, let's do it. The relationship, the new relationship that I was in, the new woman that I was dating, that was over, and I didn't have that to distract me or to use an excuse. And we set out. We just started doing the cold calls, trying to raise money, making connections with local mental health facilities, and cycling communities. And by March 1st, 2012, we started at the northern edge of the Golden Gate Bridge, um, being being you know, with the only audience was the members of the Coast Guard of Fort Baker in Sausalito, California. Um, just a bunch of strangers that would people we'd only known for a night because they let us sleep at their barracks. Um, but we set off on what was going to become a 7,000-mile bike ride. When we started in California, we were just riding our bikes with some people helping us from place to place. And when we got back to Phoenix, which was on our route, we decided to take my truck. And because what the importance was for the journey wasn't the gimmick of actually riding our bike across the country. It was meeting other people that had had the similar experiences as us, and learning from them, like, what was their story, what what was their relationship like with the person that they lost, how did their community respond to them, because it's not always a positive response. um how what was their healing journey like, what tools did they learn, what helped them. That's what it was. That's for me, that's what what the bike ride was about. By the time we even started, I had already accepted the fact that my brother was gone, and that he died by his own means, that he did it himself. So I'd already come to terms with that. A lot of people, they're angry and furious with the person that they lose to suicide, and I totally understand that, but I didn't have that. I didn't have that anger, frustration, and or rage against him. I was just like, "Eh, fuck." Like, I just had the pain. Um and so we set out on this cross country bike ride. We rode our bikes through 21 states, had events in over 100 cities, and I learned a lot, not only about like suicide, but the where the stigma came from in our history, the battle that that local activists had to do, and working with therapists and mental health um, centers to actually create a community that people could find help with. So, it was amazing. I met Dr. Campbell. I can't think of his first name right now, but he was in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, and he was one of the individuals that like was really paramount in creating like support groups for um for people to go to. And he also created the Lost Group, which is local outreach for suicide survivors, where there would be a team that together, and the lead of the team would know somebody, a representative with a police department or with first responders. So if a suicide happened, they could be called that night, and then they could come onto the scene and be with the recently bereaved.
Mm.
And they could be kind of like the person that they contact. If it was cold outside, they would have jackets for them and blankets for them. If they smoked cigarettes, but they were supposed to leave the house immediately, because suicides are always looked upon as a as a murder scene before all of the investigation concludes that it's a suicide. So like having a lost team there is just like, oh, you smoke cigarettes, but you left your cigarettes inside. One of us will go down to Circle K or 7-Eleven or whatever, quick stop, and grab you a pack of smokes or get you some food or get you something to drink and just be there with you. And then when the time comes, that individual is left with literature that says like, hey, these are where support groups are. They usually be contacted the next day to make sure that like, hey, do you need to see somebody to talk to? Do you want one-on-one or do you want a group setting? So it was cool. Frank Campbell is his name, Dr. Frank Campbell of Baton Rouge, Louisiana. Um, just meeting an extraordinary amount of people that are doing like great work in the community. I think that was like the most important thing for me, was just to learn from people. And I think most importantly is that like I feel like it took me 34 years, but I finally learned confidence within myself that like I could put something like this together, not only do like the business aspect of it and deal with the rejection and making all those phone calls, but I could also deal with like the physicality and the emotionality of the bike, and then all those conversations that we had. Because sometimes it would be like only 6 people there, other times you got like 500 people there. And so we didn't know what we were getting into until we walked in through each door.
What is something during that process that you encountered, learned, or discovered that really surprised you?
I think this is the crux of the book that I wrote too. Um, like the universe, I'm gonna get a little weird.
I'm here for it.
The universe is kind of like made of experiences. It's like an experience machine.
Yes.
And not all sentient beings are around to witness the experiences. Sometimes it's just like an asteroid smashing into a planet or a star going supernova. But these are experiences that cascade, ripples all across space and time. So experience is just that. It's just experience. It doesn't care about good or bad. It just is. It is what it is. And experiences happen to us all the time. When it
Mhm.
happens to a sentient being, part of the processing of an experience is the ego's need to label it as a good or bad,
Mhm.
right?
For protection purposes, sure.
Yeah, totally. Um, so here I was in Turtle Bay. I think it was called Turtle Bay in Pensacola, Florida,
Mhm.
with Rayla Villanueva. She lost her brother as well, and she was a local activist for suicide awareness. She took Zach and I in. We were there. We were in Pensacola for a few days. Got us massages. Um, had a couple different events at a couple different places. But like one day, she got us some paddle boards, and the three of us just went out and did some paddle boarding. And at one point, we just kind of like laid on our boards, and we just like the three of us were like in a pyramid shape and we just with our heads pointed towards each other and we are just circling. And I just like this peace came over me. This just great peace came over me. And then I had the realization of like, I, everything that I experienced in life, good and bad, got me to that moment in time where I had this like just overwhelming sense of peace. And, you know, wellness influencers will tell you that it's just a choice. How you feel is just a choice, you know? And as much as I hate them, and as much as I am an anti-influencer, um, they're wrong and right at the same time. There is a choice. But the fine print is there's a massive journey that one must take before they get to the recognition that there is a choice. And what I realized at 34 years old, uh, 10 years away from my brother's suicide, that once we've had the time to process our experience and we're able to take a step back from it and we're able to separate ourselves from it, that's when we're able to like understand that a choice has taken place. And the choice is like, do I want to be a victim of this experience and wallow in it? Or do I want to be a student of this experience and learn from it? Because it's happened. And at some point in your process of after experiencing it, you get to the point and you don't even realize it's like a choice. You just get to a point where you're like, well, fuck, now what? And like, but that's like an important place to be. That I think that's like one of the most beautiful places one can find themselves is when they ask that question, because it's the most important question that you can ask. Now, what am I supposed to do with this?
Right.
And as much as that feeling that you're in could feel like a mountain, you've just asked the most important question of the entire situation.
Right.
And you're also at a place of great power, that like you can go in an infinite amount of directions from that point, you know? Um, so then have to ask yourself, well, okay, what? You're the one that has to come up with the answers. Because you're the only person that can come up with the answers. And it goes back to the whole concept of self-awareness is that like it's your journey. It's your journey, dude. Like only don't if anybody says, "Hey, if you just follow these 10 steps, run away." Because they came up with 10 steps that help them out. You need to come up with your own playbook, and it could be 2 steps, it could be 100 steps. You will know that. It's your journey, your quest that you have to go on. You could be brilliant. You could find that you have the greatest skill of alienating people. But you still are stuck with one person that you have to deal with until you die, and that's you. So figure it out. Figure you out. I think that's our only, we all have been swindled into this idea of having to pay money to exist. So then we have to go out and get jobs so that we can, give that money to certain institutions in order to have like what society has deemed an acceptable life. But really, the only job you have is to know who you are. That's the only job that really is important for you uh, to have an optimal life. It's just like figuring out who you are. Because I meet so many people that have just, when it comes to finances, they've just crushed it. They have big houses, they have expensive cars, and then like they hit 50 and they're just like, oh, and they freak out. Or they hit 40 and they freak out and they're just like, I don't understand what I'm supposed to do. It's just they never took the time to really assess who they are as individuals and what they really, really, really desire.
It's
And I
almost
think
like There's a
But
lot going on to prevent us or distract us from figuring out that one very important question, right? Like the entire entertainment industry. Then you
yeah.
get things like big pharma, and then you can look at
Hmm.
things like food production and the things we eat, right? All of these things are very distracting. So
Hmm.
that big question, it sounds so simple, but simple doesn't always mean easy.
No, not at all. And the thing about it is that like I used to be part of the aluminum hat brigade, you
Oh,
know,
yeah.
in my
Lots
in
of
my
conspiracy theories.
in my late teens and early 20s. I used to totally be part of the, and I still love reading those things because like I'm a writer, and if you're a writer, especially in the fiction arena, and you need inspiration, just go find yourself a conspiracy website, and like, you know, it's never dry of inspiration. And but being saying that I was part of the aluminum hat brigade is that I used to always think it was nefarious. And I think that it's more selfishness and just negligence. I
Right.
don't feel like George Carlin said, like, you don't need a formal conspiracy um when you know, how did he say that? You don't need a formal conspiracy when interests converge. You know what I mean?
Right. Right.
Like I think it just comes down to selfishness and negligence. And
And
that's why
humans are
we're
easy to manipulate, right?
yeah, yeah.
Like, and unless you go through some sort of existential crisis that causes you to be able to step back and look at something, most people just don't do it. It's just not on the radar. It's not regular, right?
Yeah. Yeah, there's two paths.
Yeah.
You have two paths to going on it. One, you just said you have an existential crisis, which, 9 out of 10 times it's probably like some type of traumatic experience. Or it's just you just wake up one day and you're like, oh my God. So it's either an existential crisis or damn it, I need a humanities credit in the for my degree, and I'll take this philosophy class or this mythology class. That'll be easy. And then like your mind is blown after 4 months of one semester, and you're just like, oh, who am I? What's this all about? I need to change my degree, you know? Um, it's I wish that there was just like a class, starting in kindergarten, as soon as you get to school, that like just like, math and science and humanities, that there was just a class that was just called self. And you learn different meditation techniques, you learn different breathing techniques, and first learn how to like pay attention to your body and how it responds to stress, and then you like learn ways of how to navigate that through different meditation, and then you start doing different like art meditation. You just go on and every single year from kindergarten till like senior year in high school, you've gone one level up in learning about how to operate you. There's no grade. You either participate or you don't, you know. Um, and because, like, you usually don't get into that stuff until you're in college, anyways.
If you get there, then
If
man,
you
I
get
know
the,
some
yeah,
people in 40s and 50s that are the lights are just coming on and they're like,
yeah,
wait a minute, my life's more than half over. What am I doing?
yeah. And another thing too is like I'm a big, big, big supporter of psychedelics and the power that they wield. But I am very skeptical in just anybody doing it.
Oh, yeah.
There's a lot of messiah complexes that happen after an ayahuasca ceremony. It's like meeting somebody who finds like some type of, health fad. Oh my God, I found this greatest thing and you have to do it too, or you just don't understand. Um, and it's just like it's one of those, it's just wild to me too, like how many people, like they've never had an original thought in their entire mind, and then they have their minds blown in Joshua Tree or the Amazon, and they just come back and they come back with wild ideas and try to like sell that as like a a fast track to like healing oneself, or they just become kind of like addicted to the novelty of the whole thing. One of like the other thing like that I would say that I learned, that I took that idea of like experience and I took it with me as I continued to ride. You know, Pensacola, I think, was like a little bit for past the halfway point on the bike ride because we didn't do a straight line. We did a giant W. We seriously like just and we started at the Golden Gate Bridge because of the documentary The Bridge, about all the people that had jumped off the Golden Gate.
Mhm.
And we decided to end at an art retreat center in upstate New York called the Chapel of Sacred Mirrors, that's ran by artists Alex and Allison Gray. I first discovered Alex Gray because I'm a big fan of the band Tool, and he's done like all of their album covers since 2001's Lateralis. Um, and a lot of all of Alex's art is pretty much inspired by the journeys that he's taken um, on psychedelics. Beautiful, beautiful pieces of art. But when I got there, they, you know, they knew that we were coming. They took us in. They have a full moon ceremony once a month, and they were, you know, would be having one like 2 days after we arrived. So they gave us a place to stay for a few days and asked if we would speak about our journey to their community. But afterwards, there was like a big party, and like Alex Gray, and especially he also wrote a book called The Power of Art. So art to us when we were writing, it was one of the things we were talking about and we would preach when we were talking with people, is like the importance of creativity.
Mhm.
Even if you don't think you're creative, like you, there's something inside of you. You can be an artist for the audience of one, that being yourself. You know, that it's important just to create, that there's something happening both as an audience member and as a creator, that is kind of like a currency that takes place. Um, and I saw it in real life as I saw people tripping over themselves just to be near to Alex. And I found it like astonishing to me. And it's sad that I found it astonishing because it's totally like part of like celebrity culture, that like people will do anything and everything just to be close to greatness rather than to attempt to cultivate their own. And you know, I just when I saw this happening, I was like, that's when the idea of the like currency between artist and audience is that as an audience member, you're part of this like interaction between you and the art when you're watching it. And you know, if you walk out of a movie or you finish reading a book or you walk out of a concert and you're just like high from it, like from the experience,
Yes.
you know, that like something brilliant has happened where you've been given this like energy. And I think it's important to then take that energy and put it into something that is your own, and to continue the transfer of that energy. And it's, if you don't, you waste it. You
Yeah.
waste what the artist has created for you. And then it just becomes, you know, uh, instead of that's why I would say, like, you know, my big mantra is that like inspiration is greater than influence. And it's and that's what the currency is. It's like an inspiration, energetic currency and if you don't use it, it just becomes adoration, which is like the most disempowering. You know, it completely destroys the self at that point. It disempowers and disengages because you look at this thing as the in awe, that it's just like, oh, I could never be like that. And sure, maybe you won't have the same stylistic, or maybe you don't even get the same amount of audience, but that's not what it's about. You know, you create, you know, I didn't write a book thinking I was going to become a millionaire. And whoever does start writing a book thinking that they're going to make any money off of it,
Haha, funny joke.
good luck.
Yeah.
You should do something because it's like breathing.
Because you
If
love it.
you, yeah, if you don't do it, you're gonna die. You feel like you're gonna die. it's breathing, it's loving, it's nourishment just to be in the act. No matter how frustrating the act of creating could be. As a writer, sometimes Taika Waititi said it best. Sometimes writing is opening up your laptop, staring at a blank screen for 8 hours, then crying for another hour, then closing your laptop and walking away. That right there, even though nothing was written, was your day of writing. You
Right.
know,
Right.
like sometimes but that's just part of the process of creating and building something, is that like knowing that it's not always going to be easy. Man, there were days on that bike ride I was just on the side of the road and I had sores on on my bottom, and the humidity was unbearable, and it seemed like no matter how far I rode I was always going uphill. And I just hated everything about it. But like I would never trade even the worst days on the bike ride um for a day of comfort in the office. You know? It's just
Yeah.
like
You have to. It's something like you said, it's transmuting the energy, right?
yeah, yeah, yeah. And it just goes back to that whole idea of like, they're the good and the bad in an experience is just the good times, they just don't last very long. You know what I mean? Like, and just time speeds up when you're just having a good time, and then time slows down when you're in despair. And I think a lot of that is because it's you're giving the extra opportunity to learn more about yourself. Like why did this happen? What do I do with it now? And those are the moments that you really have to lock in and see what life is giving you, where to go with it.
So where did life take you after the bike ride adventure? What
Well,
what are you doing with your time and attention now?
one last thing about the bike ride, about the idea of experience and being a student from it. And I'm constantly reminded with it every single day. I met my partner at the end of the bike ride. I was introduced to her via email. Um, when we set out on our bike ride, we still hadn't contacted the Chapel of Sacred Mirrors. And it wasn't until we met with an individual at MAPS, the Multidisciplinary Association of Psychedelic Studies, that they put in a good word for us. Excuse me, so by the time we got back to Arizona, I was finally introduced to via email. Brad sent out the email. Allison Gray responded, said, yes, we would love to have them. We love the idea of their mission. Uh, Thomas, here's Sharon Steluto. She's our hospitality manager and event coordinator, one of our event coordinators. Like, just be in touch with her. So I'd email her once a month on the bike ride, just for like, hey, don't forget about us. This is where we're at. We're still on schedule to be there. And then before we entered every single new town, I would always like call our contact, have like a 5 or 10 minute conversation. And I called Sharon a few days before we were going to be there. I was in Manhattan at our host's house and in their kid's bedroom. But I called Sharon and we were on the phone for about an hour, and I felt like I was just having a phone call with an old friend, somebody I hadn't heard from in a long time. And she had such a pretty voice, I had to Google stalk her. And I was I was I was happy to find a very beautiful woman in that Google search. And we dated for about 2 years after the bike ride, and then I convinced her that you don't have to shovel sunshine, and she moved out here to live with me. But like, she's just a constant reminder that like, how do I meet her if my brother didn't die the way that he did? That's a really weird thing to wrap my brain around. It's just that like a negative experience can lead you on a quest to somewhere positive and safe. But I think a positive experience can lead you on a journey to somewhere negative, So
Right.
it's just like you got to take it. You just have to be aware. You got to be pay attention to the life. You got to get out of neutral and really participate in what's going on and try to, no matter how regimented your life is, there's always mystery lurking around the corner and it wants to play. So engage it and be with it and use it to learn about yourself. Right now, you know, I wish my passions paid the bills. They don't. I
No, really?
I work at a library. I found myself at a library. I found my people. I'm amongst many nerds and nerds of different genres and persuasions. I love the mission of the library. The library is the last bastion for those that have no other place to go. We deal with a lot. Librarians are asked to also be social workers. So the next time you're at your local library, give many thanks to your librarian. If they seem cranky, just understand they put up with a lot more than you would expect them to have to. Um, yeah, and I have a podcast right now. The channel is called Rise Frequency. If I interview somebody, I relabel it as inner monologue. Otherwise, I do a kind of an audio diary every 2 weeks called Stages, and it's just me kind of emoting about what it is to be a middle-aged man going through life, being a caretaker. And then like, my first love is in the artistic realm is become writing. I recently published my book 2012, A Bicycle Odyssey, a 7,000-mile bicycle journey for suicide awareness and the healing power of art. Um, if you have lost somebody to suicide, there's a thread in there for you. If you like the beatnik on the road kind of like lifestyle, there's a thread in there for you. If you like cycling, there's a thread in there for you. Um, if you're into kind of like woo-woo adjacent mystical spirituality, there's a thread in there for you. And if you just like pop culture and pop culture references and Easter eggs, there's a thread in there for you. So if you like all of those things or some of those things, this book is for you. And I've just continued writing. I'm writing a fictional anthology of short stories right now. Um, I've really kind of like jumped into the realm of Gnosticism,
Mhm.
and Gnosticism kind of being its own type of spirituality of self-awareness, but has a very rich um, mythology connected to it. And so I'm writing a short story anthology about a modern Gnostic tale. Um, and I'm having a lot of fun with that. So
Good. Good, Thomas. I really appreciate you sharing your story and your literal journey. That was awesome. I am sorry for your loss, but I am glad that at the other end of those things has been a really beautiful life. And I'm glad that you were here to share it with us today. Is there anything else you'd like to share that we haven't touched on?
No, I mean, if you're interested in reading the book, go to risephoenix.org. There's a link on there for the book and for the podcast. And just know that your journey is the most in for you in your life is very, very important. If you don't know who you are and what you want, you're going to have an entire world trying to convince you of who you are and who you should be. Don't listen to them. Follow your heart and try to figure out who you are. In the immortal words of the oracles of Delphi, know thyself.
Thank you, Thomas.
Thank you.